And as soon as it looks like most people are in, we will kick this off. So hello, everybody. Okay, so I will continue to admit people from the waiting room, but let's go ahead and get started. We have a full agenda today. So my name is Brooke Parkinson. I'm the Director of Volunteer Houston. Hello to everybody, and thank you guys for taking time out to join today. We have a pretty diverse panel today, and I'm excited to share this information with you. I will go ahead and hand this over to Martin, but before I do, just a reminder, if you guys have questions or comments at any point during the session, just drop them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat for the questions, and we can, we'll be sure to share those questions with the speakers and get you some answers. So Martin?
Thank you very much, Brooke, and welcome to everyone. This is going to be, I think, a very resourceful discussion today. We have some wonderful agency partners that are our peers that are going to share some of their successes and challenges. We're going to talk a little bit about fundraising and how some tips that you might consider in doing that. We have our partner, United Way, of Greater Houston, and Amanda McMillan will be speaking to you. And we're going to move now to Dr. David Purse, who is the City Health Authority, part of the City of Houston Health Department, and the person charged by our city to make sure that we're safe and to make the right designations for us as a community during this pandemic. Dr. Purse, we look forward to your remarks, and I'm sure there'll be some questions to follow if you're willing to answer them.
Of course. Well, first of all, let me thank everyone for letting me participate and do what I can to help. Mr. Kaminsky, your introduction is a little daunting. I'm the one making the decisions to make everyone safe. So let's start off with wearing seatbelts, don't drink and drive,
Right.
ride a bicycle, wear a helmet, and
Eat right.
But focusing on the coronavirus, an update. I mean, I think everybody knows to wear a mask and stay distant and meet like we're meeting here. We know all that. So the current situation is that most of our data that we're using to monitor the system, most things are improving, and that's great news. Hospitalizations are starting to come down. Now they're still too high, but they're moving in the right direction. I was just got off the phone talking with some colleagues, and the overall for all the hospital beds that are occupied, we're finally down to below 15% of those have COVID patients for the general hospital, the non-ICU beds. And so that's great because that was well up into the 30% range. So we're below half of that. And with the intensive care units, we're down for Harris County, this morning we're at 31.2%. And that at one point had actually been over 50%. So the numbers are moving in the right direction. Now I say that, but in Harris County alone, at 31.2% of the ICU beds having COVID patients, that's still 483 people. So that's still a lot of people that are in the intensive care unit fighting this virus. So while things are improving, I don't want anyone to think it's time to take our foot off the brake. I don't want anyone to think it's our time to let down our guard. We're being successful because of all those things that we're doing. The other big news is that many of you saw yesterday is Harris County came out with their guidance to get schools reopened. And that was very controversial, a tremendous amount of passion on both sides of that issue. But you know, the goal is, and I will phrase this in a way that is somewhat unpopular, but if put in front of a TV camera, I would say the same thing. That there is no right answer. There is no perfect answer that's going to make everyone happy. I feel, and I've said this to the mayor and to the judge, and I said this back in January, is that as we move forward, we're going to find ourselves in situations where we get to decide which way do you want to be wrong. And the schools are a great example of that. If we let the schools open, or if the schools open to full occupancy with minimal protections, we're going to have a disaster on our hands, because while the kids tend to do fairly well with the virus, they're going to bring it home and spread it to their parents and their grandparents who aren't going to do fairly well with the virus. And in fact, when you look around the world, we've seen a couple of instances where that has happened. The flip side of that is that if you keep the schools closed too tightly for too long, kids universally suffer from that. So, you know, which way do you want to be wrong when this is all over? And so right now we're leaning towards doing our best to try to get the community to get the virus under control so that we can get lots of kids back into school as quick as possible. But that's not dependent on the superintendent. That's not dependent on the mayor, the judge, Dr. Shaw, or myself. That's dependent on moms and dads and, aunts and uncles and everybody kind of, herding the kittens, if you will, to do the things that we need to do. And the same goes for business and for your enterprises and what you're trying to do. How do you protect your colleagues and yet achieve your operational goals at the same time? And the best way for us to do that is for us to get this virus under control by doing all the things that we need to do and not stopping. There's a country song that says, when you're going through heck, keep on going, right? So don't take our foot off the brake. I don't know if that, Mr. Kaminsky, I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for, but that's what I'd start with.
I think that's a great start. Thank you. Are there questions? We're looking in the chat room. Either Jody or Greg, do you see anything that we...
Yeah, I don't see any questions yet, but it's not too late if you guys have any. Lots of introductions. I'm glad everybody's saying hello. What about vaccines? Do you have an update there?
So yes, the Russians have the answer. Yeah, so here in the United States, we have several phase 3 trials. So to bring it up to speed on how that works, phase 1 trial is generally a very small number of people, maybe 30 people will be given a vaccine to see if they become ill from the vaccine. If that doesn't happen, then they'll go to a phase 2 trial, which is generally a couple of hundred patients, maybe 300, maybe 500 people will get the vaccine. Now they're starting to see, is it efficacious at all? Does it actually protect people from getting infected? That's probably 20% of the question. The other 80% of the question is, again, do people suffer any complications from the vaccine itself? And if the answer to that is no, there's not a lot of complications, then they go to phase 3 trials. So phase 3 trials, where we are now, this is where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people get the vaccine. And this is where they're really not looking so much, of course, still monitoring for any problems, but really looking to see if those who get the vaccine versus those who don't, if there's a difference in how many people become infected. This usually takes years to get to. And remember, this vaccine, to remind everyone, this vaccine really first became news on Christmas Eve. For me, it was Christmas Eve. That was I will never forget Christmas Eve 2019, because that was the first time that I heard about this virus and what it was doing in Wuhan. So here we are just a handful of months later, we're already into phase 3 trials. So this is rocket speed for vaccine development. And then through the phase 1 and phase 2 trials, things look really pretty good from a safety profile. Now, again, for those of you who are my age and older, we may remember 1968 with the swine flu, and Gerald Ford was president, and the United States sort of, quickly pushed forward with the vaccine for the swine flu. And it turned out that the swine flu that year really wasn't terribly bad, but there were problems with the vaccine. So while we're all happy to see the vaccine moving forward, we do still need to be responsible. And I say we, I'm talking about the vaccine pharmaceutical community, really do need to still be responsible and dot the I's and cross the T's as we move forward and make sure that it actually is safe, that we don't have a repeat of 1968. So things are moving much more quickly, but I think that they're still doing their due diligence and trying to be safe. I think that the Russians are probably, they haven't done, they've done animal studies on their vaccine. I don't know what they've done, and they've done a handful of human, but they're nowhere near where we are. So the Russian vaccine is a bit of a joke with American scientists right now.
Great.
Thank you for that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We do have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, how do you know the difference between the flu and COVID-19?
Yeah.
Start there.
Yeah, so this could be a real problem. This is one of my biggest fears. So I project that as we enter into what you call it the fall, I call it virus season. But as we get into viral season, my fear is that as a community, we're going to be in one of two places. We're either going to be doing a great job of controlling the spread of all viruses, including COVID, by all of the things that we've talked about, or we're going to be doing a lousy job of controlling the spread of viruses. And if we wind up doing a lousy job of spreading the control, or of losing control of the spread of viruses, we are unfortunately, we're going to have a lot of people who are going to have COVID disease with the shortness of breath and the cough and a low-grade fever. And this is the large number of people who have minimal symptoms. And they're going to say, oh, it's not COVID, it's just the cold, or I've just got a little bit of flu, or it's some other virus. And they're not going to take the precautions, and they're going to continue to spread it, in which case we're going to have a disaster on our hands. Remember that when compared to the flu, I think it was either Harvard or Yale looked at the New York City situation, and they calculated that within New York City, that the COVID virus was 24 point something, I think 24.1 times more lethal than the seasonal flu. So that's a number that we don't need to ignore. So you can see where people are, it's our human nature, I think, to be a little bit in denial that I have the bad thing. And I think a lot of people are going to fall into that human nature, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of confusion as to what I'm ill with come the fall. Now, we've got a lot of testing that's available for COVID, and the timeline and getting your results back is getting better and better as more and more labs are coming online. But as of today, we are seeing about 1/3 of the number of people taking advantage of testing opportunity as we had just a couple of months ago. So people aren't taking advantage of the COVID test. And so when flu season comes, and by the way, the rapid flu test that we've used in emergency departments, and I've been an emergency physician for 30 years, we don't generally use it in the ER anymore because we know it is notoriously inaccurate. The bedside test, the rapid flu test, is notoriously inaccurate. And so, yet there are still a lot of physicians and doctors' offices and clinics that use them. And so people are going to go in and they're going to get these readings from these bedside flu tests that are inaccurate. And depending on what they say, they're going to go from there. And well, I've already sort of told you what my fear is, that people are going to be writing off their COVID disease as something else because so many people have mild illness.
Okay.
Dr. Pearce, I know that you're responsible also for emergency medical services. Anything from that perspective, and mainly how are your workers doing, and is there anything the nonprofit community can do to help that very important front row service for our community?
Yeah, so first let me say thank you for thinking of them. As you know, we've already had 2 funerals from firefighters that have died, and we have another one who is quite critically ill right now in the hospital, and he's in really very bad shape. And so we're praying for him. So one thing is that, and a lot of people are doing it, is it's asking the questions you just asked, if and showing the concern. They've got plenty of PPE, they've got the training. One thing possibly that we could do, we are seeing, and Chief Pena mentioned this yesterday, we talked about a month ago at a mayor's conference, but it's worse this month than it was last month. We are seeing a really significant increase in the number of people who are dying at home. What we think is happening is that folks are afraid to go to the hospital, or it may just be the denial that they may have COVID disease. We're not sure, but it's up almost 50% since what it was in February. These are folks where we get on scene, and not only are they deceased, but the body's already stiff, or there's pooling of blood or something, that they're beyond resuscitation. And that number is way, way up. And so if you look at the total number of patients who we do CPR on and try and take the hospital, that number is about unchanged. So I'm sorry, this gets a little graphic, but in the number of people who grab their chest, say, I think I'm having a heart attack, and they go down, that seems to be stable. The number of folks that, the paramedics get on scene and we start doing CPR on, that's pretty stable. What's gone up is the number of people we get on scene, and we haven't seen, Uncle Dave since last night because he's had a fever. We thought he had COVID. So he's been isolating himself, and he didn't come for breakfast this morning. He didn't ask for his breakfast. I went and checked on him, and he's cold and stiff. And so that's up 50% from what we usually have. So again, I'm concerned that people are not getting the message. They're in denial. Also, for whatever reason, we're seeing this in particularly within the Spanish-speaking only community. I fear, I can't point to a statistic or a measurement, but I fear that due to language barrier, that maybe the message isn't getting through. I fear that because people are afraid of immigration problems and other stigmatization issues, that they're reluctant to ask for help, and they're literally dying as a result. And so one thing we could do for the community as well as the first responders is, if any way we can help and here's the other thing I'll tell you, I don't think that there's anything genetically different about Hispanics or Latin descendant people that are putting them at a greater risk. I actually believe this is a question of poverty. These are, you know, and with the Hispanic Latin folks, there are other social sorts of things, the fear of immigration, language barriers, so on and so forth. That's what's putting them at a disadvantage. So whatever we can do to reach out to that community to empower them to be able to take care of themselves and their family members better, that would be helpful.
Thank you so much. I think it's time to move on.
Well, we do have one more question. I think we have just a few minutes left. We actually have a couple questions.
Okay.
The first is, do you think we've already seen the second wave, and would you expect a third wave of positive cases, or have we not hit the second wave yet?
Yeah, so here in Houston, I don't think we've had, so we're coming on the downside of what is really our first wave. You know, back in March, we had a little bit of an uptick, and I've, you know, sort of jokingly referred to that as a ripple. But if you look at the numbers, that was a tiny, tiny fraction of what we've got now. So this really is our first wave. Our second wave, I fear, is going to come when the viral season hits, and we'll see. We'll find out how bad that's going to be. But that will be our second wave. And remember, historically, the second wave, I hate to tell you, I'm such a Dr. Downer, but the second wave is generally worse than the first historically. And so I'm worried about that. But, you know, that's historically. So this is a different world than you know, the plague or the Spanish flu or some of these other ones. When we talk about historic pandemics, it's been a long time since the world has seen a pandemic like this. So I'm hoping we're going to do way better than previous generations did, but we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. Okay. One last, I think this will be a quick one. Do you expect that widespread testing will continue through the flu season?
Yeah, that's another great question. Boy, I hope so. Because right now we're heavily dependent on support from the federal and state governments for those testing sites. Everything from the PPE to the swabs to to paying the labs. A lot of that is coming from outside sources. So as long as that continues, and the mayor has made the commitment that come heck or high water, we're going to have, the city of Houston will have something. But right now we've got 5 mega testing sites that can do thousands, well, at least hundreds. The smallest ones do 650 tests a day. We're only getting about 200 people at those, however, but we can do up to 650 tests a day. And we've got another more than a dozen, I think it's 15 other sites that are much smaller, can do 100 to 250 tests per day scattered throughout neighborhoods across Houston.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That's good to hear. All right.
Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Peirce. We always appreciate hearing from you. You're welcome, of course, to stay on. I'd like to call on Amanda McMillan now, the Chief Executive Officer and President of United Way for Greater Houston, who's going to give us some updates. Amanda.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me. Dr. Peirce, thanks for your perspective today. As always, it's very helpful. And Martin, Jody, Brooke, Greg, thank y'all again for getting these sessions together. I think it's really helpful, and I'm pleased to be a part of it. Brooke's going to share a slide I put together that just gives you a brief overview of what we're seeing currently in terms of need. And then we can also share this document behind all this. We've got just an overview of United Way services generally, and then behind that, and it will be outdated about 5 minutes after right now, but it also includes some of the key resources available across the 4-county area that United Way serves right now. But to focus on this slide just for a minute, I thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit of a visual on what we're seeing from our 211 Texas United Way helpline, which is the largest of its kind in the country, and we operate 24/7, 365 to connect people with help and hope across the region. To date, and our year starts on March 1st, so since March 1st, we've had over 888,000 total connections. About 200,000 of those, the people making the connection have identified that it is a question related to COVID. So we'll focus primarily on those. That's the pie chart in the upper right-hand part of your screen. What we're seeing, this is a summary of kind of the cumulative calls to date. You can see that overall, since March 1st, food instability has been a meaningful need across the population. Now, these priorities do change over time. So if you took a snapshot today of what our average calls look like, the ranking is a little bit different. you'll see rent assistance far and away at the top of the list right now. That's probably not a surprise for anyone on this call. It's then followed by utility assistance, and then COVID-19 testing information, and then calling about food instability after that. So I would say currently those are the top 4 call priorities in order, but this is an overview of what we've seen cumulatively to date. Obviously, some of this, as well as some other needs assessments, inform the work that we do in terms of dispersing funds from the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund, which we've partnered with the Greater Houston Community Foundation on. So to give you a brief snapshot of that process, we have raised $17 million for that fund, which has been great, and already dispersed over $13 million of those funds, funded over 80 nonprofit partners across the area to make sure we're helping people take care of those urgent, immediate, basic needs in the middle of this pandemic, really trying to reach out to the most vulnerable aspects of our population and give help where it's needed. And you can see here kind of the individuals served so far and kind of where some of those funds are going to in terms of need. So we'll all be continuing to assess what we can do. Heading into the fall, as Dr. Peirce said, there's a high likelihood of a second wave. Obviously, with the economic disruption this has all caused, these needs aren't going away. So we're continuing to work with other leaders across the community to figure out what we can do to help. The city and county efforts, they've recently announced, both with respect to additional rent assistance, as well as trying to help with the digital divide in education as we head toward the beginning of the school year. Those are great and terrific. And we'll share this document at the end of it. Some of those resources are highlighted, so if that's helpful for you to pass along to some of your teams and clients to share, that's great. And as always, we encourage everyone to call 211 in case they have any, in case you know anybody who has any needs, they need to identify where we can provide some assistance. That's a high-level overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions people might have.
I don't know that we have any questions in the chat box. Might have one come in, but thank you for sharing that. And I will, like you said, email that to everyone who registered after it's over. So
that'd be great. And I'll make one final point on the rental assistance. You can go to 3 different sites. They'll all get you to the same place. So I'll just go ahead and just name those right now. HarrisCountyRentHelp.org, HoustonRentAssistance.org, and BakerRipleyRentHelp.org. Any of those links will take you to the same place for that process. There's currently a slightly different application process depending on where you live within the region, but any of those sites can get you where you need to go if there's anyone who needs rental assistance.
Amanda, can you share those URLs, websites one more time? I'm going to drop them in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's HarrisCountyRentHelp.org, HoustonRentAssistance.org, and BakerRipleyRentHelp.org.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, and the landlord enrollments will go from August 17th through 26th, and then tenant applications will be from August 24th to August 30th. And that information's at the back of the document we just shared.
Perfect. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Today, we're trying to provide some resources about volunteering, about serving clients, and also about fundraising. Interfaith Ministries is very fortunate to have services of its Chief Development Officer, Maria McGee, and she was just going to share some ideas, and we'll be open to questions either during this meeting or perhaps after the meeting if you need to be in touch with her. Maria, would you share your thoughts?
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you all for being with us today. I'd especially like to thank United Way for its continuing support and for its support through the Greater Houston COVID-19 Fund. We found that really, really impactful. I'd like to just share our own experience of fundraising during COVID-19 Interfaith Ministries fiscal year just ended June 30th, and we did exceed all our fundraising goals. I think the key to successful fundraising in good times and in bad is diversification. It's important to fundraise from a variety of sources, both public and private, and also through a variety of means: online giving, direct mail, virtual events, proposals, major gifts. And especially in times of crisis, it's important to be firing on all those cylinders, not to focus simply on one area or another. Quick response is also important. We began our COVID-related fundraising the second week of March. As soon as the pandemic really started impacting Houston, we started pivoting on all our fundraising appeals. This required a lot of flexibility on my team. It also required strong leadership from Martin and our board to have the confidence to go ahead and fundraise. I saw other organizations who were indecisive at that time or who waited. I know a lot of you may be nervous about asking for money at a time when many families are suffering financially. But we got out there early with our message. We tried to temper our donor messaging with language acknowledging that some donors may not be able to give at this time, but if you are able to, please make a contribution. We had to pivot very quickly on our Tapestry Gala. We had already started selling sponsorships the previous winter. We were 70% to our goal, and 3 weeks prior to the event, decided to pivot to a completely virtual setting. The event exceeded its net fundraising goal and was successful, but just the importance of teamwork and having that flexibility was critical. Direct mail, we had our monthly direct mail packages planned months in advance. We went back and tweaked that language to reference COVID-19, particularly on the outside envelopes of those mailings. That proved effective. Email proved very effective during COVID. E-appeals, we were running weekly e-appeals throughout March and April. Proposals, we reached out to our largest foundation and corporate donors just to apprise them of the work we were doing during the pandemic and our challenges. I particularly found LinkedIn a very effective way to communicate with corporations. We were sure to recognize those corporate major donors on LinkedIn, as well as to communicate our work. And some of those posts alone led to new corporate gifts from companies that had not supported us in the past. The messaging we're receiving from our foundation supporters is that they expect their giving to remain strong at least through the end of calendar year 2020. And then finally, the area of major gifts. You know, we really weren't sure how our individual donors would react during this uncertain time. We found that major gifts did perform strongly, particularly in the area of donor-advised funds. And I believe the key is good donor stewardship. Just continuing to communicate with your major donors, not particularly soliciting them, but just checking on them, asking, how are you doing? Is there anything we can do to help? Our programs continue to function during this time. I don't think it's rocket science, what I shared with you all today. It's just fundraising best practices, but they're only intensified during times of crisis. We've been very fortunate to bring in significant revenue during this time. I hope that continues. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you all might have.
If you'd put your questions in the chat box. Because of time, we're going to move on to Sandra Wyckoff, but we'll come back if there's time to answer other questions. Sandra is the president and CEO of Target Hunger, and she's done a great job using volunteers at a critical time in her operations. Sandy, would you share that with us? You're muted right now, so please unmute.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to Interfaith Ministries. These updates are excellent, and thank you, of course, to the United Way. They're a very significant partner. As an essential service, Target Hunger has been operating continuously since the pandemic began. And just for brief context, Target Hunger is one of Houston's largest hunger relief organizations and one of the food bank's most significant partners, distributors. We were founded in 1989 as a program of the United Way, and the initial focus was hunger in the 5th Ward. Brooke, if you could kindly share the first slide of the map. Over the years, Target Hunger's primary service area has grown and now encompasses much of Houston's Northeast region, which is a low socioeconomic area with roughly 1 in 3 level food insecurity through most of the zip codes. In 2019, Target Hunger provided 1.8 million meals to more than 20,000 people. And in 2020, we are on track to greatly surpass those numbers. In a typical year, Target Hunger has always relied on tremendous volunteer support and benefits from roughly 10,000 volunteer hours annually. As a United Way organization, we have been so fortunate to have so many corporate groups provide lots of support for food distributions, warehouse operations, and a host of special projects. We also have typically had many community-based groups and individuals that provide support for the 6 pantries, 50 food fairs, packing food at the warehouse, and helping in our community garden. In March 2020, Target Hunger had to change operations to adhere to COVID safety protocols. With the exception of the senior delivery program, which has also been modified to be absolutely without any contact, all food distributions were consolidated to drive-through contactless events with food placed in car trunks. These take place throughout the Northeast service area 3 or more times a week, with each event serving up to 300 households, which translates to very long lines of cars. And the map does show where these distributions are. Since March, Target Hunger has continued to receive volunteer support, much of which comes through Volunteer Houston. Overall, though, it is lower than in the past for several reasons. First, corporate groups are generally not available now, and most of those that were scheduled for the spring canceled. Also, many of our regular volunteers prior to March have not been able to come back as they represent an older demographic at higher risk for COVID. We also see that there is less reliability among volunteers, presumably to do with risk or possible illness or exposure or changing work schedules, or the fact that some of our outside distributions have challenges, especially at this time of year. While there are fewer groups than before, we've had some real bright spots, one of which is that there have been a few groups that keep coming back in full force, and they've been very dedicated to work at the food distributions. And this has led to a new Adopt a Site volunteer initiative for disaster distributions to sort of capitalize on this support. And we're very excited that the slots are filling up. We found that we are staying in touch, much like it is with donors. We want to stay in touch with volunteer groups and individuals who may not be able to come now, but we know in the future they will, when they're ready, they will come back. That said, to ensure that we have enough help right now, we have supplemented the workforce with independent contractors to work with volunteers and staff, hoping to help those who've sort of lost work opportunities and make us a little bit less reliant, at least for the time being, on volunteers. Brooke, if you could show the next slide, please. Target Hunger, we strongly value the health and safety of staff, volunteers, and clients. And in response to COVID-19, we've implemented safety practices recommended by the CDC. And at all the disaster distributions, we take their temperature and we log it. Face coverings are required and we provide them when needed. Gloves are always worn and provided. Hand sanitizer and disinfectant and wipes, all of that is readily available for use. And we strive to maintain 6 feet social distances and have staff that are very committed to reminding people on a regular basis. And we also advise everyone to stay home if they are sick or have been exposed to COVID-19. Brooke, if you could go to the next slide, please. The need for food assistance is critically important to the community, especially now. There's a much higher need and a high percentage of people who have not needed assistance prior to the pandemic. We anticipate hosting disaster distributions for the foreseeable future and very much need volunteers at the food distributions and as well as at the garden. So please feel free to reach out to me or Ricky Berry, our volunteer services coordinator, at any time about volunteers or food assistance or for any reason. Thanks very much for letting me speak, and I hope everyone stays well.
Thank you so much, Sandy. That information is really encouraging to all of us who need volunteers. It's now my honor to call on Barbara Bronstein, who's the CEO and founder of Second Servings, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her work and what they're doing during the COVID crisis. Barbara, you're muted. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Martin. Second Servings is Houston's only prepared and perishable food rescue organization. Our mission is to alleviate hunger and reduce waste by rescuing perfectly edible surplus food and delivering it directly to local charities. I have a feeling there are some of our recipient charities listening in on the call, which is great. I send my regards. We've been fortunate to be able to be on the front lines, rescuing record amounts of surplus food for our charities, which include soup kitchens, residential programs, homeless shelters, low-income housing, and pantries. In fact, we've done a year's worth of volume in the first 6 months of this year. And we've been through lots of challenges, as everyone on this call undoubtedly has been. But I want to give you some idea of how we've been able to be successful. We've needed to be flexible, creative, and nimble, reacting very quickly to the ever-evolving situation. Being responsive and understanding the needs of our clients and even redefining who our clients are. When COVID struck, we rescued enormous amounts of food, mainly perishables, from our established donors, such as hotels, private schools, the convention center, sports venues, and many others. And the usual bustling kitchens we would enter were usually staffed by just 1 or 2 people who were charged with clearing out the perishable food from their coolers. And it was very sad. We knew there was tremendous need on the horizon. People were furloughed, they were unemployed, and we wanted to do more for the hospitality industry that had been so good to us in our first 5 years in existence. So we quickly, and I emphasize quickly because we didn't have time to waste, we quickly developed a mass meal relief program called Dinners on Us, with longstanding partners, and directed it toward the hospitality industry, the people who were furloughed or unemployed from hotels, from the ticket takers at sports venues to the housekeepers at the hotels to restaurant servers. And we received, after 2 weeks, we received a lot of community support so that we could open up our dinner relief program to the entire city. And what we realized is we're really no longer only serving our local charities, but we're directly serving individuals and families in need. That was a big shift for us. Plus, a very big shift was we were buying food for the first time that our longstanding partners, Hess Corporation, the energy company, was donating the services of their food service staff to prepare the food, but they needed quantities of food for each preparation that we needed to start buying the food. So we bought it from our longstanding partner, Cisco Corporation. But that was a big change. That took some getting over mentally, because we had never bought food before, but we took a risk, and it provided an opportunity to get a lot of publicity that brought in more support for the program and enabled us to produce 100,000 meals. That's our goal. We've already distributed 70,000 chef-prepared meals. As far as charities are concerned, we've needed to keep in close contact, constant communication, and be responsive to their needs, including schedule changes, meal service type changes, delivery procedure changes. So keeping in close communication was very important, close and constant. We've also added new charities and food donors along the way to replace those that were either closed temporarily or food donors that were closed and not able to donate food. So we've been able to have an influx of new donors as well as new charities. And we've also had, unfortunately, starting in July, had to eliminate our daily volunteers this summer to limit the potential COVID exposures, so that our drivers are ending up working harder than ever before. But extremely dedicated folks, rain or shine, volunteer or no volunteer, in the second seat of their vans, and they're just terrific, dependable folks. And I have also hired another part-time driver, and will be hiring part-time drivers. So I throw that out there in case anyone has potential candidates who would like to join us. But in conclusion, I would say during a pandemic, here are the 6 characteristics I would recommend to nonprofits to increase the chances of their success. And that is: be flexible, be responsive, be resourceful, get creative, rely on collaboration, and be nimble. And I would be happy to take any questions if there's time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. I hope that these 3 or 4 speakers have given you a little bit of useful information and also some inspiration to the work that I know all of us are trying to accomplish in difficult times. It's important that we celebrate these success stories. Know that there are people that can help you during these times, and we'd like to continue to highlight other stories in our future meetings. At this time, I'd like to introduce our colleague, Brooke Parkinson, who's the Director of Volunteer Houston, a program of Interfaith Ministries, to talk to you specifically about how we might be able to help you. Brooke?
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's shared the resources. Like Martin said, our goal with these sessions, with these briefings, is to provide you with information that is relevant to what you are all doing out there in the field. So with that, I want to share a couple of initiatives and resources as well. The first is what we're calling for short RVR campaign, Register Volunteer Report. This is an annual campaign that is meant to serve as a reminder and a motivator to volunteers to be sure to not only register with an organization to volunteer, but to be sure to report their hours back to the organizations. We intend to run this campaign on an annual basis. This is a product of the Harris County Long-Term Recovery Committee. Several organizations are represented on that committee, including Volunteer Houston, and our hope is that we're able to educate the public in the importance and significance of reporting hours, especially in response to a disaster. Recording those hours accurately and properly and collectively allow us as organizations, as a city institution, as the county, to request reimbursements from FEMA, which guarantees that we can bring more resources back to our community to rebuild after a disaster. So fun fact for you, Houston ranks number 23 nationwide in volunteerism, and that's according to the Corporation for National Community Service. I think, and I bet you all think as well, that we do much more than that, that if we were actually recording these hours and being diligent about collecting accurate records, that we could bump ourselves up that list a little bit. So we're asking all nonprofits to help us promote this campaign the week of August 23rd to 29th. And in the email summary after this call, I'll be sure to include the link. But the link for you to download all of the collateral is volunteerq.org/RVR. And again, I'll share that in the summary email. The second is 9/11 Day is coming up soon. And we will be reaching out to organizations who are or want to organize a service project virtually, remote, or maybe even in person on or around that day. And what we will do is post all of those volunteer opportunities in one location and help promote those opportunities, back you all up with some additional exposure to recruit more volunteers if you've got something going on. So more information on that coming soon. And lastly, we invite all nonprofit leaders, employees, staff to join our Facebook group, which is called the Nonprofit Leaders Forum. So you can search that. I'll also include the link in the follow-up email. That's a place, that group is, it's a private group, but it's an opportunity for you all to ask each other for advice, to share resources, to brag on your successes, ask for help and challenges. So what we heard most from organizations is that you want a way to network with each other. In addition to the Facebook group that's there all the time, we also offer Nonprofit Leader Forum gatherings every other month. Right now that's via Zoom. And hopefully one day we'll get to do that in person again. So thank you again. I really have to give kudos to Sandra and Barbara for sharing your stories. And we have so many challenges right now, I think collectively within the nonprofit sector here, and all of us coming together to share advice, I think is the best thing we can do for each other. So thank you all.
About questions, would you like to add any of those to the chat box? We'd be glad to answer them, or concerns or issues that you would like to address that haven't been covered today. While you're putting those things in the chat box, let me just tell you that earlier today, we heard from the county clerk, Chris Hollins, who's a delightful person and eager to collaborate with all of us. But two particular areas that he's suggested that their office is prepared to collaborate in is locating polls and voting day operations at sites throughout the city. They're trying to make sure that they're broadly dispersed. There will be more than 800 voting sites throughout the Harris County area. And so if any of you have a space that's appropriate, needs to be at least 12 to 1,500 square feet, the county will talk to you, and I believe they will arrange a rental fee for using your facilities that day. Also, they're looking for thousands of poll workers that day. And if you go to harrisvotes.com, it's in the chat box, there is a place that people that are interested in being a poll worker, either through the early voting period or on voting day, can assist. They're paying $17 an hour. And so that may be important for your clients to know, or for your employees or families and friends of your employees. They're trying to hire as many as 5,000 employees for those days. So just an opportunity for you. Jody, do you see any other questions or want to bring anything else to the table? Amanda, do you have any other thoughts?
I think this is Jody. The only thing that I would add is we'll be hosting these from time to time. So if you want to put in the chat box topics of interest, then we will circle back with that and include those topics as best as we can in the next nonprofit briefing.
Would anybody like to make an announcement? You can unmute yourself if you'd like and speak up if you have an announcement for your organization. Okay, we have a quiet group today, but I know we're all busy. We're going to give you back a little bit of your time today. Thank you for being on. Thank you to the United Way of Greater Houston for their support as well. And we appreciate your attention. We look forward to any comments that you may have, and we will be glad to try to include those in our next briefing. Thank you again to all of our speakers today for sharing. This completes today's call.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Everybody. Bye.